All right, so continuing on with our outstanding guest speaker series, today the TMCC Library Open Genealogy Lab is proud to present David Carlson, Spanish Archives at the Bexar County Clerk's Office in San Antonio, Texas. David is an archivist, genealogist, historian, and researcher. He has been the curator and custodian at the Bexar County Spanish Archives since September 2012. Trained as historian of the 19th and 20th century Latin America, he completed his PhD in history at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in 2007. He was awarded the National History Award in 2020 by the Texas Society of US of 1812. When he's not reading books or working on family history, he plays fetch with his rescue dachshund mix and 2 rescued chihuahuas, brews beer, bakes bread, and cooks with his wife, librarian Deidre McDonald, goes hiking, cycling, or is out exploring historic sites or firing muzzle loaders. Today, Dave intends to spend some time discussing the Bexar County Spanish Archives and its utility to family history researchers, and the Bexar County Clerk Public Records Searches and Database and how it might benefit genealogists and family historians, and hopefully suggest additional research strategies. And he would also like this to be a practical workshop presenting techniques and strategies germane to family history research, with an emphasis on Mexican American Hispanic records, along with some other particularities of family history in Texas. So without further ado, I would like to offer a warm virtual welcome to Dave.
Hello, thank you very much. It's very kind and gracious of you to invite me to speak to your genealogy classmates. It's a little bit intimidating insofar as I'm sure that you are all very likely more gifted family historians and genealogists than I am. Certainly, I myself am a genealogist and a historian, and I've worked very hard on my own family history research. And I've been doing my level best to help people with historical research questions that are geared towards family history and genealogy here at the Bexar County Archives. So while I know a lot of what I know, I'm also very mindful that there's a whole lot I don't know. And so mindful of your time and the fact that this is on the cusp of a holiday weekend where people are going to be, being able to see their families and so forth. I would very much like to keep this as a kind of workshop and skill sharing type of event. And so hopefully this will have a more pragmatic kind of hands-on approach to working on some research questions. As was mentioned, I've been the curator and the custodian of the Spanish language materials in the Bexar County system at the Bexar County Courthouse since 2012. I have my contact information up here. I am a deputy of the Honorable Lucy Adame Clark, the county clerk of Bexar County, Texas. And I have my contact email addresses here up on screen: SpanishArchives@bexar.org and dcarlson@bexar.org. And if you shoot me an email, I will be able to respond to your question. Obviously, you're welcome to ask questions during my brief presentation and comments, and you can ask at any time. Just please be mindful. I'll also require some help in facilitating getting me back on track if I do attempt to answer a question in the middle of the presentation. And then we can all get to work and work on particular research questions that we might have. So without further ado, let me just say a little bit. Bexar County in Texas was once a district, the Bexar District, that was vast in size and scale. It included areas that are today parts of the state of Colorado, parts of the state of New Mexico, and many of the counties in West Texas and the counties in Southwest Texas were actually taken from the Bexar District. The county was established in 1837 when Texas was a Lone Star Republic. It had a revolution that started out as a civil war within Mexico, of which it was a part. That civil war pitted Federalists favoring greater state autonomy against a centralist regime led by Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna that wanted to get rid of states and instead just have a more top-down centralized governmental system based around departments. When Texas broke away from Mexico, federalism was defeated in Mexico, but in the case of Texas, it led to Texas becoming an independent republic for 9 years before it was then annexed as a state. All of the Spanish administrative records and the Mexican Republic Coahuila y Tejas records were basically left in situ. And that is basically what we mean when we speak of the Spanish archives within Bexar County. For those of you that like to start out with overarching history before moving on to the role our ancestors played in that history, I would note that on the 22nd of May, 2021, just 6 days ago, it was the 500th anniversary of the start of the siege of Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Empire of the Triple Alliance, better known as the Aztecs, the Aztec Empire. This was a long, protracted, enormously bloody, and hard-fought siege that lasted 3 months. The Spaniards, with lots and lots of enemies of the Aztecs, ultimately overwhelmed the defenders. The defenders had been stricken by European and African diseases, the so-called Columbian exchange, that had gravely weakened them. And the last defenders of Tenochtitlan were overpowered by the Spaniards and their Indian allies in Tlatelolco, which today is a part of Greater Mexico City. And if you go to Tlatelolco, you will see 2 monuments. One of them is to the memory of the students that were killed there on the 2nd of October, 1968, when they were protesting against the pre-single party government in Mexico. And the other monument that you'll see is a Mexican nationalist monument that records that it was there when the last defenders of Tenochtitlan were overwhelmed and defeated. But it then goes on to say that it was neither a victory nor a defeat. It was the painful birth of modern Mexico. And there's something to that. The Spaniards had a century-long monopoly of control over the New World. And it was only in the 17th century that other rivals to Spain began to hive off other parts of territory that it claimed but could not exercise effective sovereignty over. And one of those places where that happened is what led to the creation of San Antonio de Bexar. Basically, the French began to encroach from the Mississippi Basin into the provincias internas, the broad sort of frontier of New Spain. And so the Spanish authorities in New Spain became mightily concerned by this because of proximity to the silver mines, the cash cow of New Spain and the colonial economy in northern Mexico. We're talking about the states of Guanajuato, Zacatecas, etc., the centers of the mining economy. So San Antonio was founded early on as a military post and a series of Franciscan missions, religious missions, to minister to Native Americans and try to create of the local Indians here Spanish subjects who could be exploited for labor and also could be taxed and could be induced to pay tithes. And so that is the origins of settlement here in San Antonio de Bexar. I have here on screen a Theodore Gentile's painting of the Alamo before it was remodeled by the US Army when they used the post. But this is a nice illustration of much of the the themes that underlie San Antonio's history and are reflected in the documents that are archived here. In the county courthouse, as you know, as genealogists, people often come to the county to look for probates, wills, deeds, and marriage records. And that is certainly something that we do here at the Bexar County Courthouse. And I, by all means, want to spend at least a portion of my presentation describing and showing you hands-on how the database maintained by the county clerk in Bexar works. And you know, like you, I subscribe to a lot of subscription-based family history and database type companies so that I can have access to a lot of the records that are available, like Ancestry.com, for example, or through MyHeritage or Family Search. But I also want to remind people that earlier genealogists used to literally take family trips to county courthouses around the country so that they could sit and actually record this stuff by hand. And little by little, many county records are being made available, and it's not through a subscription-based company like Ancestry. It's actually a database. And so it behooves you to familiarize yourself with some of the counties in your family history and see if they have transparency and accessibility for court records. On screen, I simply have a postcard that shows Main Plaza, the old Main Plaza in San Antonio, Texas. And then I'm showing you a marriage agreement rather than a marriage license. This is Jim Bowie, he of the fearsome, huge knife, who died in the Alamo in 1836 during the siege or battle at the Alamo. And he married a local gal, Maria Ursula de Beramendi, who was an enormously wealthy daughter of a very wealthy family, the Beramendi family that lived off of Soledad Street in San Antonio. And the elder Beramendi was not just Jim Bowie's father-in-law, he was also Jim Bowie's business partner. And so that's why he agreed to allow his young daughter to marry this professional gambler and knife fighter and brawler and illegal slave trader and other various things that Jim Bowie got up to. But there was language in the agreement that if the marriage didn't work out, they would get part of her dowry back because there was a lot of money involved. So the Bexar archives, basically, as I said, are the administrative records of San Antonio. And fully half of the collection is from the Coahuila y Tejas statehood period after Mexico attained its national independence in 1821, the bicentennial this year. These records were housed in metal boxes in the courthouse, and most of what they were useful for was tracing property. In 1899, the turn of the 20th century, a eminent historian at the University of Texas at Austin, Lester Bugbee, I think he was Dutch to his friends, was dying of tuberculosis. And he thought it would be a great idea if the Bexar archives could be removed from the Bexar County Courthouse and shipped up to the state capital, Austin, to the University of Texas at Austin. And so in modern archiving practice, we would never, ever contemplate doing something like this, breaking up an archive. But at the turn of the 20th century, the then county clerk, Frank Newton, managed to get the county commissioners in Bexar County to agree to this arrangement. And so most of the records, but by no means all, were shipped up to the Dolph Briscoe Center for American History at UT Austin, where they remain. Now, the Dolph Briscoe Center for American History has a marvelous website. And if you're looking for a particular document, they will have it in English translation and Spanish transcription from 1717 all the way until about 1794. I can tell you that the documents and the records themselves have actually been translated by the eminent translator, John Wheat, at the University of Texas at Austin, all the way up to early 1800, okay? But a lot of those records between 1794 and 1800 have not yet been put on the website of the Dolph Briscoe Center for American History. You can go online and you can find colonial era census records dating from about the 1790s on. The last colonial census for San Antonio de Bejar was made in 1819. That is not digitized, but certainly we have a copy of it here in the Bexar County Courthouse, and we can, help you with it. So there's a lot of Hispanic genealogy, basically New Spain and the Mexican state of Coahuila y Tejas. There are some French people who were resident here during that period. There are people whose surnames reveal that they were actually Flemish. They were Flemish subjects of the Spanish monarch who came here and came to New Spain. There are a handful of peninsulares, or people from Spain proper, like the Ituri Castillo family, who was a merchant from the Basque country, who basically made his way to the New World, made his way to San Antonio de Bejar, and then married very, very well and married into some of the original settler families. The history of San Antonio starts as a military post, as I said before. It then goes to a series of Franciscan missions among the Indians, and at the behest of the first Bourbon king of Spain, Fernando V, Ferdinand V, Fernando V, a group of 10 Canary Island settler families were induced to come settle here at the expense of the crown. The crown had lofty ideas and ambitions to settle as many as 400 Canary Island families in Texas, but it was simply impossible for them to do something on that magnitude. The 10 families that heeded the call made a very difficult journey by sea to Havana, Cuba. From there, they went to the port of Veracruz in Mexico. And because of the peculiarities of the Spanish colonial system, including their mercantilist arrangements, there was no authorized port anywhere along the Gulf Coast that these folks could land at. So they had to make their way inland, and basically from just outside Mexico City, they had to make a very rigorous, very difficult overland journey under the protection of soldiers to San Antonio de Bejar. When they got to San Antonio de Bejar in 1731, they were told that because they had done the will of Fernando V, they would be made hidalgos, hijos de algo, literally members of the petty nobility. But then they were also told they couldn't leave for any reason. So I'm not entirely sure what the noble status was. But there are descendant associations here in San Antonio, and one of them is the Canary Island Descendants Association. And as you might expect, there are people who are enormously proud of being able to trace their family history all the way back to those original founding settler families. Incidentally, by the time they arrived here in San Antonio de Bejar, there were 15 families because they had started families of their own during the overland trek. And there was actually a so-called 16th family, which was the eligible bachelors. If you've read some of the literature on the history of San Antonio, like Frank de la Teja's book, San Antonio de Bejar, a community on New Spain's northern frontier, you know that within 3 or 4 generations, these families had intermarried not only among themselves, but with more recently arrived families from other parts of New Spain. Just a quick map to indicate the chain of command, if you will. Everything in what is the United States Southwest was once the far distant frontier of the colony of New Spain, ruled by a viceroy, literally the virrey, the vice king, the sub king, who was a man posted in Mexico City, and then the far distant provinces. Mexico, of course, laid claim to all of that national territory in continuity with its national independence, and starting first with the annexation of Mexico by the United States in 1845, and then proceeding through the US war with Mexico, basically fought before a war was declared on the 6th of May, 1846, running through the declaration of war, and finally the invasion of central Mexico and the Mexico City campaign in 1847, and the February 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Mexico lost the northern portions, Alta California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, New Mexico, and that was the so-called Mexican Cession. I've got a map here, the early history of San Antonio as it grew and where people resided and lived. The epicenter of the development of the North American cowboy and cowboy culture, which is so influential in the history of Texas. And today Texas, of course, is the second largest by population state after California in the United States. San Antonio is the 7th largest city in the nation. Bexar County is, I believe, somebody can check me on this, but I believe it's the 13th largest county in the United States. But a lot of Texas's contributions to American history and American culture are this cowboy and cattle culture, which has its roots in Mexican equestrian culture and settlement. Basically, Mesteños, Mustang horses, wild cattle, semi-feral cattle, and the development of cattle ranching along the river valleys of Texas. So I have a map from the late Jack Jackson here online showing some of the early ranches of the San Antonio River Valley. I've discussed the break up of the collection. I don't think you guys are necessarily interested in all of the details of that. And so I'm going to go ahead and go through some of the structures of Old Bexar. I assisted an anthropologist and archaeologist who wanted to excavate this old garita or watchtower that was built east of San Antonio. Today, it's literally smack in the middle of the east side cemeteries that were built here in the 19th century. The structure itself was razed to the ground so that they could build those cemeteries, but they used to have a little detachment of troops posted out there to keep tabs on the Comanche, the Shoshonean-speaking Nemina, or Comanche as they're more famously known as, who were the lords of all the Southern Plains, including much of Texas from the 18th into the 19th century. This is an illustration of the presidial soldiers that were posted here in Texas. This is in the Archivo General de Indias in Sevilla, in Spain, and it simply shows a very typical frontier soldier who is wearing a leather jacket to protect himself from Indian arrows. And for those of you who are watching this program from Alta California, you're familiar with this because the same practice and the same leather buff coat to protect the soldier from arrows was used by the presidial soldiers in California, in Alta California as well. I'll go ahead and wrap up my slides here in due deference to the time that remains to us. And I would like much more to make this a research practicum. And maybe we could work on some research questions and have a longer Q&A and go back and forth among ourselves, sharing skills and sharing resources and so forth. So I'll end on this typical San Antonio dwelling, a jacal, basically a house that was made of the local timber. Those of you who like Western movies are aware that they remade True Grit with, instead of John Wayne the Duke, they had the dude, Jeff Bridges instead. And there's the famous line, "Yeah, Texas, not a thing grows what got thorns on it." And definitely the thorn scrub and the thorny trees that grow here would be used as poles, and the poles would be placed vertically and piled together, and then they would knock a couple of square segment nails in between some of the gaps and knock them over and nail them together. And then you would slather mud or adobe with clay admixture into the crevices, and that would be your home. That would be a jacal. So these were the earliest structures before modern construction methods came on the scene. And so I'll go ahead and wrap that up. I'm still showing you my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and get out of that presentation. And if you bear with me, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the database of the Bexar County Clerk and show that to you. Whoops. Okay. Okay. So this is the database program.
Dave, we're still seeing your PowerPoint.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did it wrong then. Here. So if I do new share, right?
Yeah, new share should work.
Can you see that now?
Yeah, yes, that's perfect.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so this is the Bexar County Clerk website. And if you come here, there's a lot of information that's geared to the citizens of Bexar County and may not interest you very much. But you'll notice over here, there is an official public record search. And if you click on that, you come to this page, okay? Now, this page is password protected. So you have to give yourself a username that you can remember, and you have to give yourself a password that you can remember. But once you do that, you would be able to look at land records. You would be able to look at plat maps, assume names for people who are operating businesses, marriage licenses, cattle brands, and declarations of intent to become an American citizen for free. And you can download these documents as PDF files for your use at home. And it doesn't cost money, but you have to fill your cart with these documents. So it's like you're checking out from an online store or something like that, but don't get alarmed because we're not going to charge you for it, okay? So there are a lot of different court records and county records that you can find using this database. God is my witness, someday you will be able to access the Spanish language records, which have been imaged. They're just not loaded up into the database yet. So for now, you're going to have to contact the archivist, and I can try to help you with records that aren't uploaded yet. But there is quite a lot here for the family historian or the genealogist. And I wanted to just give you one from a recent ancestry search where we were helping someone. And we're going to be looking for Teresa M. Ruiz. Now, the researcher in question was descended from Teresa Moreno Ruiz before she married Ruiz. And she was trying to establish who the man was that was from the line that she was descended from. And we were able to help her and find her simply by finding an instrument in our records that is referred to as an affidavit of heirship. Okay, so I'm doing a search, as you saw, for Teresa M. Ruiz, and now I'm going to go and hit recorded date, and that's going to put everything in chronological order. And unfortunately, it's going to literally put every single record up that says Ruiz. So it's going to be really, really busy. Okay. And so you can see the earliest document we have is from 1837. And then we almost immediately jump to the 20th century and we've got this affidavit. But this is the one I wanted to draw your attention to right here. I'm going to click on it and I'm going to add it to my cart. Okay, so this is Teresa Moreno de Ruiz, who is married to a Francisco Ruiz. It's a public record, and the document type, you'll see the document types are listed here. We have deed records, we have plats, we have mechanics liens, you name it. But here it says affidavit. And if you can find one of these affidavits in our Bexar County system, you are in some good family history territory, let's just say. These often provide invaluable information about particular families and particular family trees. You'll notice here that the document was recorded in 1940, okay? And then for our own internal county record keeping, it's in deed records. It's in volume 1753 and it's on page 380. Now I'm going to click and go to my cart and I'm going to log in, and I've already got it set up so that I can log in. And now I can download this document. So I place my order and Shazam, I download this PDF. Okay, it downloads on my computer and here it is. So can people see this okay?
Yes, it's coming through great. Thank you.
Okay, great. So if I blow it up so that you can read it a little bit, you'll see that it says here, Francisco Ruiz et al. Marital and Homestead Affidavit. Okay. And it says here, it's in legalese. So every county document, as you know, is in this kind of legal boilerplate language that's often off-putting and confusing. But basically what we're looking at here is Francisco Ruiz and wife, Teresa M. de Ruiz, who reside at 530 Harrison Street. Okay, so once you have this, 530 Harrison Street, this links up to the very people that you're looking for on the US federal census records from the 1940 census, the 1930 census, what have you, okay? So this address allows you to link these specific people to a specific place on the census record. But to continue, we're discussing how Francisco Ruiz was first married to Margarita Sanchez Ruiz in Mexico in 1903, okay? That she died in Bexar County, Texas, okay? And then Francisco Ruiz remained a single man until he married his second marriage to his present wife, Teresa M. de Ruiz, about 20 July 1922. And that Teresa M. de Ruiz was married only one time prior to her marriage to Francisco Ruiz, and that was to Pascual Lopez, which marriage was terminated, and frustratingly, they leave it blank, by the death of said Pascual Lopez in Zacatecas, Mexico. Okay, so for the researchers we were trying to help, this was a godsend because we could not find Pascual Lopez. And we suspected he may have died, but we didn't know where. But now we know he died in Zacatecas, Mexico, and we can try to find him on a Mexican death register for that state. It then says Francisco Ruiz and Teresa Moreno Ruiz the viuda, the widow of Pascual Lopez, acquired the hereinafter property on May 18th, 1927, which is why we now can find it in the 1930 US federal census and the 1940 US federal census. And then they describe the property furthermore by its lot number, its block number, and its so-called NCB number. Now, this might seem like gibberish or like the height of arcane minutia, but trust me, if you're ever trying to find a property in Bexar County, having the NCB number, the actual NCB, the lot number, and the block number is going to allow you to find that property using the, we call it the BCAD for short, but it's the Bexar County, basically it's the record or the registry of property in Bexar County. Okay, and so the Bexar County, you can go to the BCAD website and you can pull up their map of San Antonio. It's a GIS map, and you can plug in these numbers, NCB 1345, block 8, lot 8, and it will show you the deed history of that house for the last 2 or 3 deed transactions, and it'll show you on a map where it is. But the other feature is that using census records, you can now link this specific family to this specific property during those specific years. And in this case, you have a lot more information about that family. You know that both of these men, or the man and the woman, were both married previously. So there are other affidavits of heirship, and if time permitted, I would show you some of the other clues that you can get from them. But let's just say that using these affidavits of heirship here in the Bexar County system, we've made tremendous contributions to people's family history research. To continue with this specific record, you've got here a record that there is a plat of the property, and then it gives you the volume and page number for the plat. And what you can do with that is you can go back to the public record search, and you can pull out plats and you can run those numbers, okay? So for example, volume 642, page 67, all right? So try to follow me here. I've gone to plats. I'm going to 642, and I'm gonna go to page 67, and I hit the search function. Only one result. It's the very result that I want. I identified it by the type of instrument. It's a plat, the volume, and the page number. That's it. I add that to my cart. I go to this cart. I place my order. I download this document. And now I have a literal plat of this subdivision. So this is basically when the surveyors mapped out this area and put this on file. And you can see the streets, Logan, Harrison, Euclid, Hudson. You can blow this up, okay? Make it larger so that it's easier to read. And you can see right here, the block and plot, the block and lot numbers listed right here, okay? So you can find this specific property on a map, in this case from 1922, okay? So for those of you who are always keenly interested in the physical sites where your ancestors lived, or you're interested in mapping using Google Earth or some similar software or program, this allows you to apply that to your family history research, your genealogy, your family tree, if you're so inclined. But you're not going to find this using one of the more typical family history research databases. But if you know about Bexar County, and you know that the Bexar County Clerk is committed to transparency, and you know that the Bexar County Clerk has got a database, you can find these records. But you're going to have to familiarize yourself with the database and how it works, which always is going to have a little bit of a, I guess I should say, a little bit of a learning curve. You know, it takes time to learn how to use these things. So that's the kind of stuff you can find at the Bexar County Clerk's website using our databases. I'm going to go ahead and go back and do a new search. I'm going to go ahead and go to Spanish archives, which is not populated very well right now. And let me see if I can figure out a surname. Let me just put in a random surname. Okay, I'm going to put in Lopez. Okay, this could be Kampmann. This could be a German who came to Texas in the 19th century. It could be someone from France. It could be someone from France who's really an Alsatian and speaks Alsatian, which is a Western Germanic language that looks a lot like German. All of the local immigrant communities who came and shaped Bexar, Texas, would fill out a declaration of intent to become an American citizen. And this is what those records look like. Okay, so we've got cattle brands for the Lopez family, and then we have declarations of intent. I'm going to go ahead and click on recorded date. This is going to show you the order in which these documents were filed here at the Bexar County Courthouse. So we've got a couple of cattle brands from Manuel Lopez and Isidoro Lopez. And then we've got our first declaration of intent for a Catarino Lopez. So I'm going to go ahead and load that one into my cart. I'm going to go ahead and come down here, and there's one from 1869. Severiano. You'll notice how it's spelled. There is a name Severiano. It's pronounced Severiano, which uses a V. But a lot of the spelling of Spanish in the 19th century is phonetic. And so you basically, oh, that's a brand. I'm not going to do brands right now. Well, it's okay. We'll go down here to Antonio Lopez. Teodoso Lopez. Anyway, we've got enough. As I was saying, a lot of the Spanish spelling, there are no fixed rules on spelling. And so you're going to find a lot of phonetic spelling. Okay. Even in the same document, someone's name is going to be spelled differently. And so it's very confusing, but it comes with the territory. We had a man, a researcher, family history researcher, an arborist by profession, who came to see us just this morning. And he is from Oklahoma, and his entire family is out of Oklahoma. And he's an African-American man, but his surname is Arradondo. And he always wondered why they had the surname Arradondo, and he couldn't quite figure it out. And it's been a source of disagreement among his family members for a long time. There was question about whether it was an African-derived name, whether it was a Moorish-derived name, where the name came from. So first we had to explain to him that the surname itself, Arredondo, comes from Santander in Cantabria in northern Spain. And that there was certainly a lot of people with the Arredondo surname that appear in Mexico and in Texas. As to why his name is spelled a certain way versus another way, it may be simply the case that it was spelled phonetically both ways, and then at a later date, for whatever reason, the family chose one or another spelling of it. But we were able to show that his ancestors were a mixed race woman who was the descendant of a slave woman and a slave holder who sired children by slaves held by his slaveholder father, and a Mexican man, possibly a cowboy, who his entire roots are in Cerralvo in Nuevo León. and we were able to show him some of the civil registration documents and baptisms from the chapels and church records in Nuevo León, and show him the family history of his Mexican roots, if you will. So without further ado, let me show you these declarations of intent. I'm going to go ahead and download all of these as a zip file. I can then open these up individually. Okay, this is the cattle brand I got. So you can see they actually put the cattle brand on the piece of paper when they register it. And if you get really lucky and you get an old enough brand, they even show the earmarks where they cut the ears in a particular configuration. This is an enormously popular record for family history people in Texas. I can show you what people do with this if you like. Let me go grab something. Okay, there was an African-American woman who was born into slavery. She was transported by her slaveholder to Texas. She may have been refugeed, where a lot of slave owners in the Mississippi Delta would evacuate their property in human beings away from Union armies and send them to Texas, okay, because there were no Union troops operating there. We don't know the circumstances with any great certitude, but what we do know is that right after the Civil War, when Reconstruction came to Texas, this African-American woman became a property owner in her own right. And very unusually, she registered a cattle brand for herself and her descendants. And so some of the descendants were overjoyed to find her cattle brand. She herself eventually settled in Travis County, where Austin, Texas is, our state capital. And she passed away there. But they found her cattle brand. And so the family chose to go ahead and emblazon the cattle brand on hats for their family reunions. So you can, I hope you can see that in the my little face on screen.
Yes, we can see it. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and of course it's reversed because, you know, it's like a mirror or something. But this is the cattle brand that a group of descendants decided to put on their hats for their family reunions. So it's a nice thing that people do here in Texas, and I suppose any place in the Americas where there's cattle culture and cattle brands, it might be something that is of interest. Okay, so let me go and look at these declarations of intent now. Let me go ahead and close this out. Okay. Sorry, I hope I'm not making anyone motion sick. Here we go. Okay. Okay, so this is a declaration of intent. I hope people can see it okay. If you have immigrant ancestors, they left a declaration of intent that they basically forswore or they renounced their past subjectivity or citizenship with a foreign crown or a foreign republic and announced that they were going to become an American citizen. If you have immigrant ancestors, these are terrific documents. Usually they're just boilerplate, but sometimes you can find absolutely amazing details on the document. We were helping a woman of salient Mexican ancestry, and we found her ancestor had filled out a declaration of intent in 1934. It was on file with the Western Texas District Court, and he indicated precisely where in Mexico he was from, his last residence in Mexico before he decided to go to the United States, where he crossed the border between Mexico and the United States, that he got married in the United States in a particular place in Texas, and where his wife's family was from in Mexico, okay? So it was truly an extraordinary contribution to their family history research. I mean, in one document, they had their ancestor, they had their ancestor's point of origin and where their ancestor was residing and where he was living and working before he came to the United States. And then we picked up his trail using property deed records and US federal census records, okay? So sometimes this type of document can be a real shot in the arm. At other times, it can be a little bit frustrating. But I'll just direct your attention that in this case, we have a Catarino Lopez. He was born in the Mexican state of Chihuahua, okay? So that's going to be closer to West Texas and New Mexico. In the Spanish colonial era, Chihuahua was known as Nueva Vizcaya, okay, the New Basque Country. Coahuila was referred to as Nueva Extremadura or New Extremadura. Nuevo León was Nuevo León. They got to keep their old Spanish colonial name. The state of Tamaulipas, which is one of our border states with Texas, was originally Nuevo Santander, New Santander, okay? So we know this guy's from Chihuahua, that at the time he makes this declaration, which is to say in 1861, after Texas has seceded from the United States, I'm making a declaration of intent to become a citizen of the Confederate States of America at this point. He is 44 years of age in 1861. So we can estimate his date of birth, which will help us. That he came through Paso del Norte, which is to say he came through El Paso, from Ciudad Juarez to El Paso. And of course, it's not Ciudad Juarez at this point. In fact, Benito Juarez is the president of Mexico at this point, and he's about to be ousted by the French under Napoleon III in their desire to create a client state in Mexico under Maximilian von Habsburg and Carlota, his Belgian wife, who's the sister of Leopold, King Leopold of the Belgians, and responsible for all of the atrocities in the Belgian Congo, okay? But let's all leave that aside for now. So here it is on the 24th of July, 1861, this man, Catarino Lopez, is registering that he's 44 years of age, that he's from Chihuahua, that he came to Texas through El Paso, and he signs his name, but he can't sign his name. You'll notice that. This man cannot read and write. This man has generated very, very few documents in his life. And instead, he makes a mark, a cross on the document. And a county clerk official has written his name and he's made his mark between his surname, his apellido or surname, and his given name. And then he's made his mark and then it's written his mark, okay? So that's an early declaration of intent. This particular one is for an Antonio Lopez. I can't quite tell, but I would think that the county official that filled this out was left-handed. What do you think? Look at the handwriting. Personally appeared Antonio Lopez from Mexico, and he was born in, it looks like somebody tried to write Guanajuato here, Guanajuato. So I'm willing to bet that this is actually a terrible transcription by an Anglo-Texan official who cannot speak a word of Spanish. And this is very frequent in Texas records. I'm willing to bet money that this is really Guanajuato. And the man told him, I'm from Guanajuato, and the guy wrote Buenjuato or Buenjuata. But we may have to figure out whether this is a real place in Mexico or not. And that comes with the territory. He's 24 years of age in 1877 when he's filling out this document, and that he arrived through Eagle Pass, okay? So that's all pretty important information. And what's a kicker is that he came in December 1868. So it was some years before he actually filed this declaration of intent, okay? we can see that this man could read and write because he could sign his name, but we also note that he rendered his own name, Antonio Lopez, as Antoni Lopez. So he may not have a firm hand. He may not be, he may be literate, but he's not particularly highly educated or well educated. So that's another example. I downloaded the same thing twice. Look at me go. Here's that Teodosa, very archaic name. Teodosa Lopez came from San Luis Potosí, a state in northern Mexico. He's 21 years old in 1877, and that he came to the United States 6 years previously in 1871, September, through Eagle Pass. And then he cannot read or write or sign his name. And so they write it out for him, Teodoso Lopez, and he writes his mark with the cross here, okay? So that's a declaration of intent to become an American citizen. And that's a type of document that we have at the county courthouse. I've used these in my own family history research. In my particular case, these records were for Swede Finns who had immigrated to work as iron miners in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And I had to discover through talking to county clerks long distance over the phone that all of the declarations of intent in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan had been relocated to a specific academic institution in Michigan. And so then I went to that library website and I talked to the research librarian or the reference librarian, I don't remember which now, and she was very helpful and explained how those records were arranged. And I told her I'm looking for a man who's a Swede Finn, whose surname was Carlson. And she said, do you have any idea how many Carlsons there are in our records? I mean, give it up, man, you're done for. There are too many Carlsons. And so I asked her if she might send me some scans of the index pages. So she sent me the indexes for the Carlsons and I waded through those and I identified which specific Carlson I needed and was able to get that record. And I got my paternal great-grandfather's declaration of intent to become an American citizen. It was filled out in 1919 or maybe 1918. And since he was from Finland, which was a grand duchy of the Russian Empire at the time that he left for the United States to come work in Michigan, World War I had broken out. He had gotten married. He had children, or they were shortly on the way. And Russia had been plunged into the Russian Revolution. It was a bloody mess. And Finland had proclaimed its independence from Russia in December 1917. And then, unfortunately, Finland had plunged into a civil war of its own, pitting monarchist whites against socialist reds. And so I thought it was kind of cagey because my paternal great-grandfather wrote that he forswore any loyalty to Russia, not to Finland. And so it's kind of a strange document. It seems like he's kind of hedging his bets. He's like, well, I know I don't want to go to Russia, and I know Finland doesn't look too great right now either. But yeah, I want to become an American citizen, and Finland's just become independent, but it's kind of up in the air right now. So one thing we can agree on, I forswore any allegiance of any kind to Russia, so don't send me back there. But at any rate, I'm sorry to take you on that detour, but basically these documents exist. It's just that for Texas, they are at the county courthouse. Some of them are held by the county clerk. Some of them are held by the district clerk. And this is enormously vexing to researchers in Texas. Like, when do I contact the county clerk? When do I contact the district clerk? Okay. just a couple of examples of people that we've been privileged to assist at my office here at the Spanish Archives. We had a man who's of salient Mexican ancestry who lives in the state of California. And he was concerned because his ancestor was a Dolores Chapa, and she married a man named Federico Navarro. And he could not make heads or tails out of Federico Navarro. And I assured him that Federico Navarro was one of the two sons born to Jose de los Angeles Navarro, a son of Ángel Navarro, and Maria Ruiz de la Peña, and that there were only two sons born, and that Jose de los Angeles Navarro had died in June 1836 and was buried at the Campo Santo, which is the oldest cemetery here in San Antonio. It's basically under the corner of a hospital on Santa Rosa Street. Archaeologists have made a database of every single person known to have been buried at the Campo Santo, and that we know that Federico Navarro is the youngest son of this man, and that he died basically, possibly even before his son was born. So then the man said, well, my aunt wants to join a particular organization in Texas that's dedicated to long-term Texas heritage through the families, possibly going all the way back to some of the founding families of San Antonio, but also to the Navarros. And the Navarro family, the most famous Navarro is Jose Antonio Navarro, who's one of two locals who signed the Texas Declaration of Independence in March 1836. And basically, if you're related to the Navarros, you're San Antonio royalty. And so I told him, look, I've just told you that Federico Navarro is the youngest son of Jose de los Angeles Navarro. Put a bow on it. I mean, you're done. You know, there are published genealogies and family trees of the Navarros. And he said, well, I can't do that because I can't prove whether Federico Navarro was really the father. Or I'm sorry, really the son. And I said, of course you can prove that. And he said, well, I can't because there's no baptism record. And so I got back to the researcher and I said, yes, you're correct. It is the case that there is no baptism record for Federico Navarro because he was born during the Texas Revolution, and the record keeping is out the window during the Texas Revolution. But there are Mexican documents that clearly show and demonstrate who Federico Navarro is and who he's related to. And the problem that the researcher had was he simply could not read the archaic handwriting. He didn't know the paleography and the handwriting. So we had to show this guy all of the information that he could get from Mexican archives. And so I've got some examples of some documents. I don't want to belabor this. I'll just explain this one, and then I'll show you some other records that we've shared with researchers. And why, if you don't know how to read old handwriting, you might just want to train yourself to do it, because there's a lot of detail that you might be missing if all you're relying on is the transcription and indexing that's done by a service like Ancestry.com, okay? So I went to this man, Federico Navarro, and I found his first marriage to his first wife. And his first wife was Dolores Zaragoza Seguin. And immediately my jaw dropped and fell on the floor. And I thought, no, it can't be. She can't be the Dolores Zaragoza Seguin. Well, it turns out she is, in fact, precisely the Dolores Zaragoza Seguin. So for those of you who are not from Texas, and for those of you who are not Mexicanos or of Mexican descent, the Cinco de Mayo, the celebration of the Cinco de Mayo, the The 5th of May, 1862, celebrates the defeat of the French army at the First Battle of Puebla, and the general of the Mexican army that gained that victory was Ignacio Zaragoza Seguin, and he was born in 1829 at the Presidio La Bahia, which was then a very unprepossessing frontier fort of the Mexican state in Texas. His family identified with Mexico more than with the recién llegados, the Anglo-Texians. So they packed up their family and they moved to Matamoros in northern Mexico on the Rio Grande. And they desired that their son, Ignacio Zaragoza, become a priest. He did not want to become a priest, and instead he set out on a military career. And he was literally the general who gained this important victory. This is his kid sister, marrying Federico Navarro from San Antonio de Bexar, San Antonio, Texas. And I pull up the marriage registration record, which is available through Ancestry. And again, I fall out of my chair because the marriage record literally states that in 1861, Federico Navarro Ramirez from San Antonio de Bexar, the son of Jose de los Angeles Navarro, grandson of Angel Navarro, is getting married to Dolores Zaragoza Seguin, the kid sister of Ignacio Zaragoza, who is then the Minister of War of the Republic of Mexico, and he's at the wedding. I mean, how many of us find something like that in our family history, right? I mean, it's incredible. So I basically contacted this researcher and was like, about that first marriage, you're not related to them, but trust me, you know, this is the documentation that's available on the Mexican side about this man. So if you were worried about not having a baptism record that definitively showed that Federico Navarro Ramirez was literally the youngest son of Jose Angel Navarro, the elder, put those fears to rest. And I basically took the researcher through all of these records. And in at least 6 of these records, many of them on the Mexican side, the parents are listed, the maternal and paternal grandparents are listed, okay? It's a slam dunk. This is the guy, right? I mean, it's incredible how well documented this is now. The researcher in question got very excited about these developments and about all these records. And so he took it upon himself to be the go-to guy for Federico Navarro Ancestry on the free WikiTree website, where you basically, it's a free website where you interact with fellow genealogists and fellow historians. And the premise of WikiTree is that sooner or later there will be one world family tree and everyone will be connected to it, okay? And while he was doing that and posting these records on his eminent ancestor, he became uncomfortable because so much of the research that he did and bounced off of us is relatively new and is at odds with some of the accepted theories and accepted speculation and stories about the Navarros. And so I basically had to assure this researcher, it's just simply the case that before digitization of records, before the time period we live in with this extraordinary, remarkable accessibility of information, people were reliant on earlier genealogical work and genealogical histories in published book form. And they simply didn't have access. They couldn't put their hands on all of the documents and sources that we can now access. And so he basically was in the forefront due to the technological changes that had taken place. And he was basically in a position where no other family historian of the Navarro family had been before. And, you know, he was able to basically blaze a trail, to use a Texasism, if that's okay. And he was able to basically subsume some of the earlier received wisdom about the Navarro family. But, you know, going into new territory is often uncomfortable. I don't want to take too much more time. I did want to entertain your questions, and I definitely wanted to answer questions or to listen to your observations and your own experiences and learn from those and have a skill sharing session. But I did want to show you what the baptism documents look like here in town, okay? Ancestry.com is working with the Catholic Archdiocese here in San Antonio de Bejar, and the archives is up on Woodlawn Avenue, and they've closed because they're doing this digitization project, but their original church records are available on microfilm, and we went ahead and imaged the microfilm to help family history researchers here with questions about it because they can't access them. And I know that this one is really daunting looking, but I just wanted to walk you through this real quickly. You've got the entry number 34, and what it says is that in 1734, okay, 1734, very early, 3 years since the Canary Island settler families settled here in 1731. In 1734, I baptized and anointed, you know, it's Santos Oleos, Maria Ignacia, who was born on the day 24 de Julio. Okay, so this is a case where we're using phonetic spelling. So instead of 24 using a V, the priest has written it using a B, okay? And his handwriting is enormously difficult to make out. But this part is boilerplate, you know? It's that he baptized, and then he put the sacred oil, he anointed to Maria Ignacia, who was born, que nació el día 24 de Julio, hija, the daughter, legítima, the legitimate daughter, born inside the marriage, de Andrés Hernandez. Now notice, the H is silent in Spanish, so he just left it off this surname and wrote Hernandez. But at a later date, the priest came through, another priest, looking at this record and slapped his forehead and said, "Ay caramba, I can't believe he spelled Hernandez that way." And very helpfully, he penciled in for our benefit this modern spelling of the surname, Hernandez, even including the accent on the A, Hernandez. So even if we can't read the phonetic spelling, right? Andrés Hernandez, okay? It's here for us. Andrés Hernandez and Juana de Hoyos. Now, modern day, this surname is going to be spelled Hoyos, Hoyos. Again, it was spelled phonetically then, Hoyos, Ollos. And then it says, fueron sus padrinos Francisco Hernandez. Okay, a Francisco Hernandez is the godfather. He shares the same surname as Andrés Hernandez, but this may be a clue. This man may be the grandparent, he may be a brother, he may be an uncle, but we have the same surname we have the godparents. Should this child, Maria Ignacia's parents, pass away, the godparents may well be in the position to raise this child as an adopted child. So the godparents may offer an important clue. And basically at the end, we get more boilerplate. Sometimes this is even in Latin, in which they're basically saying that the godparents acknowledge their responsibilities to the child, et cetera, et cetera. And then the priest writes that he affirms that all of the above is correct and true. And he writes his name, Don Jose de la Garza, and he puts his rubric so everybody knows what his signature is. Okay, so even if this is just impossible to contemplate right now, like there's no way I'm going to be able to read that kind of thing, train yourself to do name scans and scan for names, okay? And even if you can't read the bulk of the document, learn to recognize the names and scan for names, and you can find this would be really beneficial. So this is 1730s era baptism records from San Fernando Church here in town in San Antonio, okay? This one, let me go ahead and blow it up so you can maybe see it. This document has been water damaged. It's going to be enormously difficult to read, okay? But we can go to this document and we can start scanning it. And we can say that in San Antonio de Bejar, okay, we can see the surname for the family, Trevino, okay? And it says here, I can't read the date, but basically the 20-something of February, 1808. So 1808, I, the father of the parish, solemnly baptized and anointed with you know, holy oil, etc., Maria de Jesus, okay? Let me shrink this down. Okay, Maria de Jesus. And he describes her as a parbula, which is literally just an infant child, a parbula for a little girl or a parvulo for a little boy, española. And what is being referenced here is the colonial Spanish caste system, okay? The Spanish Empire was an exceedingly anti-democratic, non-democratic place, and there was a pecking order, and your place within that pecking order was circumscribed by your social status, your access to wealth, and by your sangre, your blood. And so there was a caste system, and they would literally record what they thought the proper caste of a child should be. And in this case, the child is listed as a criolla española. And that means she's of salient European ancestry as far as the sky pilot, the priest, is concerned. And so that's what he wrote. So they put the caste identity of the child here. This drops out in the early Mexican Republic in their official records because it's seen as a kind of odious legacy of the colonial system, and it goes by the wayside. But it's a rough racial identifier. And it's not unlike the US one-drop rule system. It's not hard and fast. People could, we have examples of people who were recorded by the priest as being mulattos at the time of birth, meaning that they're presumed to be part European and part sub-Saharan African in their ancestry. And by the time this guy dies, he's like very socially prominent and very wealthy, and the priest records him as being a criollo español. So it's like he gets whitened later in his life. So there's some degree of the people can change their caste over time, and it's particularly marked in frontier societies like that of Texas. And for all I know, you may find the same thing occurs in Alta California as well. That because it's a frontier, so there's greater social mobility, and the caste system is not as hardwired as it is in other parts of New Spain. And then it proceeds to reel off her parents, but I wanted to draw your attention that right here, just doing a simple name scan, okay, we see that she's the HL, the hija legítima, the legitimate child. If she was born outside marriage, the priest would have written hijo natural. That's the euphemism that is used for children born outside marriage, outside wedlock. Obviously, as many of you know, with the history of pejoratives, the word bastard is the term for a child that is illegitimate, born outside of marriage. And depending on the culture that your ancestors are from, this could be, really remarked on by the priest or by the society. In the case of San Antonio, fully 1/3 of all of the baptisms of children in the early 19th century are hijos or hijas naturales. They're born outside marriage. So it's very, very common. We find cases where widows and widowers will begin living together and they'll start having children together. And the children are born outside marriage, and eventually the couple decide to go ahead and get hitched and get remarried. And but there's a time where they're both the survivors of a past relationship and they don't see any reason to get remarried. We find other cases of poor women who do not have much control over their personal autonomy, who are effectively concubines of wealthier, more powerful, more prominent men. Obviously, there's levels of coercion in that relationship because it's so unequal. But the priest will sometimes write that a woman is a particular mother of a child who's an hijo or hija natural. Sometimes he very sort of cattily will write in parenthetically who the father is. At other times, the father will acknowledge the paternity of the child, even though he's not married to the mother. So you're going to find a lot of variation in that. But again, even if you can't read this crazy handwriting, by all means, just start searching for the names. And if you scan for the names in this document, you get to here and it says abuelos paternos. And thank you very much. The priest literally wrote down the paternal and the maternal grandparents of this child. So this is one-stop shopping for family history. You get a baptism record like this or a civil registration record like this from when Mexico becomes a republic, and you're going to have the child, whether the child is the product of a marriage or born outside of a marriage, which can often be a clue to the social status of the people involved, not always. You're going to find the surname of the father and the name of the father, the maiden surname of the mother. You're going to find the paternal and maternal grandparents. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, if you're doing family history, finding a record like this and being able to read it is a huge shot in the arm. And it behooves you to, even if you can't read all of the arcane jargon and Latin and other terms, just scan it for the names, find the names, and you'll be rewarded. I don't want to, basically go on and on and on, but you can see the names. Here's, Maria Ignacia Perez. Here's Jose Tobar. Tobar is today spelled with a V. Here it's spelled with a B. And here's Brigida Trevino, okay? You've got the godparents, you've got the grandparents. I mean, it's golden. I'm not going to go into this. I have other examples. If you want these as a tutorial or something like that, by all means, we can make these available to you to read or to scan. Just note that sometimes the priest had wonderful, very clear, easy to read handwriting. Other times, not so much. Other times the priest, had a really bad hand, or like this one, the document is damaged. It's been water stained. And the ink has run, there's acid damage, the paper itself is in bad shape. And now, before I go to Q&A and a kind of more workshop-oriented skill sharing segment, I did want to show you, what if I want to learn how to read old colonial Spanish handwriting? And so I'm going to tell you how right now. For starters, there are paleographic and orthographic websites available to you. If you're in Spain, they sell books where you can buy these books, and it's like a course to teach yourself the vagaries of archaic Spanish and archaic usage, and to teach you the literal shape of the letters and so forth. And those can be enormously beneficial. There are a lot of websites. There are a lot of websites dedicated to Dominicans who've settled in New York City. You can go to Centers for the Study of the History of the Dominican Republic, and they've got tutorials online. My late maternal grandmother was from Fife in Scotland, and the National Library of Scotland has an enormously helpful online tutorial to teach yourself 17th century Scottish handwriting, which is kind of like a Scottish shorthand. I've looked at it and stared at it, and I think what's going on is it's how to make a letter with the fewest movements of your hand and fingers with the pen set on the middle of the future letter. That's a plausible explanation. There's other explanations, which are that they just had terrible handwriting and that their letters are awful. But I think that's what's going on here. But it's an incredibly difficult handwriting to make out. And helpfully, the National Library of Scotland has made a tutorial online available. And you can try your hand at it. You can try your hand at reading it. And then they have examples of documents. And you can try your hand at reading it and then see how badly you got it wrong based on a transcription of it. So for those of you who may have ancestors in the so-called Seno Mexicano, which is to say the Provincias Internas, the northern frontier states of Mexico, I wanted to show you this website. And for a number of you, obviously, you don't have ancestors from the northernmost parts of Mexico, so this may not be as useful or interesting to you, but let me just show you what's going on here, because I think this offers you an insight into where technology is driving things for the family historian, okay? Over the course of 6 years, the Archivo General de la Nación in Mexico City, that's the main National Archives of Mexico. They're in the old Lecumberri Penitentiary in Mexico City. The former cell tiers are now literally the storage areas for the record groups, okay? It's an amazing facility, and they went ahead and got together with UNAM, which is the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, the largest university in Mexico City, and the Instituto de Investigaciones Históricas. And over 6 years, they decided to go ahead and digitize all of the documents from a particular visit by a pair of auditors that were dispatched from Mexico City all the way up to the Rio Grande, the fourth largest river in North America, to audit the efforts by Jose de Escandon, an Indian fighter in the Spanish army who was a sergeant in rank, who had been given the responsibility and the task of settling that area with settlers who would keep out Native Americans that were hostile and inimical to the Spaniards and keep them from raiding farther into northern New Spain. These documents are from the 1750s, okay? Spain proper, Spain itself, did not have a national census of any kind until the 1770s and 1780s during the Bourbon Reform period, okay? And so before there was even a census in Spain, these lickspittle auditors went up and took censuses of the founding villas along the Rio Grande. And so if you have family from this area, it's incredible what you can find here. Here are the names of the original villas. Here are the missions. And you'll see that some of them, it says no tiene, so there was no mission. And then it tells you the volume and the foja, or the numbers of pages that are in this record, okay? So you're looking at this and you're like, well, my Spanish is pretty rusty and I'm having a hard time with it, but gosh, I'd sure like to know if any of my ancestors came out of Mier, okay? So you go to Mier or Camargo or Reynosa. Most of these places are literally on the river across the border. In the case of Laredo, it was actually built on the north bank of the Rio Grande River. And so when the United States gained this national territory through the War of Conquest against Mexico, large numbers of people in Laredo crossed the river and started Nuevo Laredo. But Laredo is in Texas. It's in Webb County, Texas, and it was one of the founding villas along the Rio Bravo or the Rio Grande. So I go up here, I'm going to grab Mier, okay? Mier. I hit this. What you're looking at on screen is the original color document from the Archivo General de la Nación bearing their watermark. And you can read that it says Villa de Mier, número 16. This is the legajo, or the bundle of records that you would receive in Mexico City before they digitized this record. They would literally bring this legajo to you as a bundle of records, and they would untie a knot, and they would leave this in front of you, and you would go through it page by page. Only now you can do this from a fast computer at a public library, an academic library, or even your own home. So I'm going to just go ahead and hit Siguiente, and I'm going to scroll through this record, okay? And since time is pressing, and you guys probably have questions, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but what I wanted to show you was this, which is what I was talking about. This is literally the census. And so they list the family, and they list the settler, and it says, Capitan Don Jose Florencio de Chapa, casado con Doña Maria Margarita de Peña. So you've got a captain in the Spanish army, Don Jose Florencio de Chapa, and that he's married to Maria Margarita de Peña. You also know that he's being referred to as Don, and she's being referred to as Doña, and that's an honorific. So these people have got a lot of social prominence. Tiene 10 hijos. They have 10 children. Now, we don't have the children's names, but we have 10 kids living in this household. Todas armas. They're literally counting the weapons available to this household because it's incumbent on them to do military use, militia service against the aforementioned Shoshonean-speaking Nemina or Comanche, or the Athabascan-speaking the Lipan Apaches. Okay, they have 10 horses, they have 5 donkeys, they have 4 female donkeys so that they can breed mules, on and on and on. And like bestia caballares, how many horses, how many mules? They even have how many hardy oveja sheep they have. I mean, ganado menor. It's like this completely bewildering level of detail that they took. And this is available for these tiny little places in the Seno Mexicano long before there's even a federal census, or not a federal census, but there's not a crown census in Spain proper, in Spain itself. We don't get census in San Antonio de Bejar until late into the 1790s. And you can see here, you know, we want to make sure that armas, the armas include an escopeta, basically a smoothbore musket, an espada, a sword, and a darga, which is a leather shield to ward off arrows, pistolas, cuchillos, trabucos. I mean, like, you know, if you're not an arms fancier, this is lost on you, but like, this is the panoply of colonial era New Spain, all of these weapons. And so you can just go through this and look at the surnames, Hinojosa. If you go to South Texas, there are tons of Hinojosas, and many of them have roots in the Rio Grande Valley and in Mier, okay? We get here, Doña Maria Lopez Viuda. She's a widow. Tiene 6 hijos. She has 6 children, okay? And you can just go through this, and you can look at all of these people. You'll start to notice as you go through that a lot of people no longer are identified as Don, okay? If they're not a Don, they're probably of mixed race. They're probably a person considered to be a lower caste. They're a person who's simply poorer and less well socially connected. And you can go through this and you can just see all of these people. Lázaro Vela, casado con María García, 7 hijos, sin armas. The guy doesn't even have weapons, okay? Cuatro caballos, he still has 4 horses though. And on and on and on. I mean, this is the kind of material that may not actually be available to you if you stick with your online subscription-based resources. But all over the world, people are engaged in this endeavor of digitizing records, putting them on websites, making them available. And it's a question of discovering these websites and accessing them and using them, okay? And that's basically the final remark I wish to make in my presentation to you. I'll gladly entertain any questions you may have. I'll look forward to listening to your observations and your reactions. Again, if I wanted to teach myself the handwriting, I would put a sheet of paper over half of my computer screen, and I would try to make my way through this handwriting and try to figure out if I could read it. And then I might pull the sheet of paper away and quiz myself, like how close was I, okay? But before I could even learn the handwriting, I at least have the benefit of being able to do a name scan on a modern transcribed account, okay? And with that, I'll end and turn things back over to Suzanne and to you all. And I thank you very much for your kind attention. And I hope that this was useful to you, and I hope that you gained something from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. There's some good questions in the chat box. Let's see here. Todd wanted to point out that Bexar County is currently the 16th largest county in the US by population.
Okay, here I was a Texan telling a tall tale. When history becomes legend, print the legend, right? Well, I apologize for that. We're the 16th, not the 13th. I got ahead of myself. But thank you for the correction.
Let's see here. Bill says the Lopez Declaration is from 1885. His arrival was in 1861, therefore not CSA.
Right.
Let's see here. Connie says, so it sounds like I should research any family surnames that might have come to America from Western Europe, including Scandinavia.
Yes. Scandinavian family history research is enormously difficult simply because Scandinavians did not have inherited last names unless they were in the nobility or the clergy until 1901 in Sweden, when they finally made it a law in Sweden that you had to have an inherited last name. Before that, there were artisans' names. And there's a bizarre feature of Swedish history that's reflected in naming practices, which is that in Sweden, if you joined the army, you were what was called an allotment soldier. And so a group of farmers would be made responsible to housing you and your wife and providing for your wife and your children with farm labor while you were doing military service. And the farmers that were organized in what's called a root. And they were called the root because everyone in Sweden was a member of a root and had to contribute to this system. But the farmers found it preferable than paying high taxes to the king. So the idea was, we can create a contract and induce a young man to join the army for our root. And the community will look after this guy's house and will help his wife and kids out while he's off serving. And we're going to go ahead and build him a farm, and we're going to build him a nice little cottage, and it's going to be great. And these soldiers in the allotment system were given an army name, okay? So the reason they were given this army name was because in the Swedish army, it was like Private Anderson, hop to it, you know, fall in. And half the company comes running over because they all have the patronymic Anderson, okay? So in the army, they would give you an army name, and you would be given a number, which was the number of your cottage that the peasants had built for you, and you would be given an army name. And usually these army names are pretty bellicose, you know. It's stuff like Schuld or Shield or Moedig, like bravery, or sometimes they mock the soldier, like there's Cupid, which I think is mocking the guy because he's attractive or good looking, or maybe he is really keen on you know, romantic adventures with the ladies. I don't know. Sometimes there's Elephant, and I think it's just because the guy might be physically very large or very big. And if you find a soldier ancestor in Swedish church records, it's a godsend, because by the early 19th century, these guys start to bequeath their army name to their children. They're like, I served in the army. It's not my surname, but by God, it'll be my children's surnames. And so some of the earliest surnames you're going to find are going to be soldier names. It's the same thing for the Navy, except that in Sweden, I mean, you know, Sweden, people in other parts of Scandinavia make fun of Swedes and say that a Swedish sailor is a farmer who was dipped in seawater, okay? But most of the sailors in Sweden historically were from urban areas, and these guys were given really nautical names like you have on ships as their sailor name, okay? But again, they often kept these sailor names. In my own personal family history, I was wading through all of these patronymics. Jon, the son of Anders, who was the son of Anders, the son of Olaf, who was the son of, you know, that's what you have to do. You just have to go on the farm and the patronymics. And lo and behold, I had an ancestor who listed her name as Christina Stina Richter. And I thought, Richter, that's judge in German. Sure enough, her father was a Feldjäger. He was a rifleman at a time when the vast majority of soldiers were armed with smoothbore muskets. So he was a specialist troop, and he was given a cottage in the town where he was from, the farming community, which was given the number 79, and his soldier name was therefore 79 Richter, even though his name was Jonsson, Jon, the son of Jon, right? And so he bequeathed that soldier name Richter to his descendants, and they used it ever since. And it was a huge shot in the arm. And so, yes, Scandinavians who came to the United States, who decided to remain here, should have filled out a declaration of intent to become an American citizen. And if you're lucky, you get the right one. If you're unlucky, you get the whole list or the top 10. Denmark had inherited last names starting in the 1820s or the 1830s, so that might be a little easier. Norway did not have a national level requirement to have an inherited last name until 1924. So if you are descended from very poor, plebeian, fishermen, farmers, working class Norwegians, it might be tough for you dealing with all of the variations. The nobility in Norway very frequently would emigrate to the United States, and they would drop some of their noble titles. So there are people that their surname was Hansen Tollerud, and you're supposed to know that they're not just any Hansens, they're the Hansens from Tollerud. But here in the United States, they dropped that, and they just became Hansens. You may find, I have Norwegian friends, their surname is Nordahl, literally the North Valley. If Nordahl in Norway is spelled with an H, they're from the nobility. If Nordahl is spelled without the H, they were the serfs who used to work for the people with the H in their surname, Nordahl. So Scandinavian surnames are notoriously difficult, and genealogy going back to Scandinavia is a huge brick wall for a lot of descendants, and it's very difficult to get through the brick wall. But if you are of Swedish descent, the artisan names and the soldier names will be a huge boon to you. If you have someone in your family that did military service. A lot of the Swedish surnames that are things like Ander, Wallander, Lassander, that kind of name, that's a clergy name. Then you know your ancestor goes back to somebody who was a pastor in the Lutheran Church. But yeah, a declaration of intent should be beneficial to you. Here in Bexar County, our declarations of intent are very, very saliently from the German-speaking states. So Prussia, Nassau, unified Germany, and then the United Kingdom, Great Britain, Ireland. There was once a Irish neighborhood here that was called Irish Flats that no longer exists, but there was once a very, very thoroughly Irish neighborhood. But lots of Germans, some Belgians. We had Belgian farmers coming to southern Bexar County from the get-go, working in vegetable farms.
Dave, speaking of that, April, I see you're still logged on. If you want, you can unmute your microphone. And I think she has a name that she'd like you to look up.
Okay, bring it.
April, are you there still? I see your name.
I'm here, but I think Todd told me that the date that I'm looking for is 1866. And I think Todd said that I'd have to go to Family Search for that.
Well, let's try it. What's the name? April, are you there?
Oh, sorry, I muted myself again.
That's fine.
It's Amelia, either with an E or an A, and the last name is.
But is it a man or a woman?
A woman.
Oh, it's got to be a man. Because women were not able to vote until the 19th Amendment and voted in the 1920 election. And so women didn't fill out these declarations of intent, I'm afraid to say. It's only a male phenomenon. Did she emigrate alone, or did she come with male relatives?
I don't know. You know,
okay.
The class started and we were talking about these non-paternal events.
Okay.
Well, in the last 2 weeks, I've just discovered that there's somebody that's part of my family from like 3 or 4 generations back that was one of those. And so I'm just trying to track it down. So
Right. This is something, of course, that is truly extraordinary about DNA research. I just heard an absolutely incredible story from one of your colleagues who takes this class with you, describing his discoveries using DNA. And so certainly, that's a good thing. I would encourage you to try to contact those people. There are organizations and chat rooms and forums that discuss these kinds of things. I know this sounds a little melodramatic, but there's even a support group for people who got DNA results back that were like really, really profoundly surprising. As you know, there are people that they send away their DNA and pretty much all they want is the pie chart, right? Show me the pie chart. That's all I want. I want to know what parts of the world my ancestors emanated from, and I've inherited genes from what portions of the world. That's really only my interest. That's it. They get their results back and it's like, no, actually, there's stuff in your family history that's really, really utterly different from your self-identity, who you think you are, your place in the world. And it can be enormously jarring and even shocking to people to make those kinds of discoveries. And so I think we shouldn't be surprised that there are literally online self-help groups for people that are in that situation. What do you do when DNA completely overturns or upends some development or understanding that you've got about your family history? And so I would encourage you to look into that. This woman now was Amelia, and then what was her surname? Are you still there? Oh, I
Yeah,
think
she's still there. She just has her microphone off.
she muted herself again.
Yeah, sorry, I have a dog and I'm afraid she'll bark.
Yeah, trust me, with my rescue dogs, when they start acting up, when I was working from home, like, you know, that the camera would like go to like try to find the dogs making noise when I was online. So it's
Well,
awkward.
the last name was Lujan, and they contacted me. I guess the fellow that contacted me, his mother, two of his sisters, and one of his nieces all took DNA because they couldn't figure out why in the family of Castros and Fernandez's and Lujans and Grandos, why they had Italian DNA and why I was a DNA match to them.
Wow.
Now, this goes back into my somewhere in the neighborhood of my great grandfather, great grandmother, great grandmother, and in her family, I can tell by the names that I have matches to. So they are not very used to doing trees,
Right.
ancestry tree. They have an ancestry tree of, the biggest one was, I think, 23 people. So I'm trying to help them
Right.
get their side of the tree done so we can narrow it down. But,
Right, right. Are these Castros and Hernandez surnames? Are they Hispanic or are they in Texas or?
Well, this Amelia, she was supposedly born in Texas.
Okay, Emilia, and you said Lugan, Lugan, Lujan or
Yes.
Lugan?
Yeah, however, I've been pronouncing Bexar as Bexar, and
Right.
wasn't it? Maybe
Right.
you said.
Yeah, no, the word itself is very likely Arabic and probably comes from the Moors in Spain. And it was probably at one point Beshar, almost like the Arabic name Bashir, right? Beshar. Over time in Spanish, the X became softened into an H sound and became Bejar, okay? Bejar. So famously, Mexico is Mexico because it's spelled with an X. But when the Spaniards showed up and laid siege to Tenochtitlan 500 years ago, they were the Mexica, Mexica. And so then Mexica became Mexica. And then from that came Mexico or Mexico. If you go to Mexico, you'll find that frequently the X and the J are used interchangeably. Most modern Spanish language spellings are going to put the X as a J. But just to give you an example, there is the town where a lot of coffee is grown in the state of Veracruz on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, and it's called Jalapa. and people who come from there are called jalapeños, like the peppers, jalapeno peppers. And on maps, it's spelled J, Jalapa. But when you actually go to the town, everyone there still spells it with an X. And the town itself was originally Xalapa. And when it was Xalapa, it was in the 1300s. And the Spaniards simply took the place over and started calling it Jalapa instead of Xalapa, but they originally wrote it with the X. If you compare Spanish to Portuguese, the Portuguese still uses the X as an SH, okay? So it's more archaic even than Spanish. So in Arabic, Muslim people will sometimes make the comment, inshallah, which literally means if God wills it, inshallah. In Spain, people say, ojalá que, which is basically if God wills it, but now it's just, well, I hope so, right? So ojalá comes from the Arabic, oshallah, inshallah. And in Portugal, they still say oxalá que instead of ojalá que. So the X was originally an SH sound, then it became an H sound. And then unfortunately, it got chewed up and mangled and anglicized, and it got turned into Bear County. So if you come to Texas, people literally say Bear County. And it's like, wait, it's got an X in the middle of the word. Like, I mean, isn't that even a glottal stop? It's like, no, it's just Bear County. So yeah, you're right. It's spelled Bexar. And if it was pronounced by people outside of Texas, it would be Bexar County. But in Texas, it is Bear County. Texas is filled with these examples. There is a town near the Gulf Coast called Refugio, literally refuge in Spanish. And if you go there, the locals will refer to it as Refugio. Okay, that's how they pronounce it. There's a town in Texas called Llano. It's basically L-L-A-N-O, which means plains or prairies in Spanish. And if you go there, the locals pronounce it Llano. They don't call it Llano, okay? So Texas is filled with this kind of stuff. I think the most egregious and perhaps most famous example is the word buckaroo for cowboy, which is actually a corruption of the Spanish word vaquero. So like el vaquero, a cowboy, a ranch hand, a vaquero becomes a buckaroo. But all of the cattle culture words in Texas are anglicizations of Spanish words. Rodeo, lariat, everything basically. So it is always a source of confusion. If you have long-term Texas residents who were Anglo-American settlers who came to Texas when it was still a Mexican state, you find the reverse is true, where Spanish officials who speak no English are corrupting an English word into a Spanish word. And this can be very bewildering. So you have an ancestor whose name was William, and the Spanish word for William is Guillermo. But when an English speaker says his name is William, a Spanish speaker will sometimes hear it as Williams or Julian, William. And so people named William are startled to find that their ancestor, William, that they wrote his name down as Julian and not as Guillermo. Surnames. I showed you Jim Bowie, James Bowie's marriage to Ursula Beramendi. There are times you can find him in the Spanish language records here in Bexar County as Santiago instead of James. And his name, Bowie, is spelled B-U-Y, Bowie in Spanish instead of B-O-W-I-E, which wouldn't make any sense to you if you spoke only Spanish. We have the surname Sawyer, S-A-W-Y-E-R, and a Spanish official will write, or a Mexican official will write in Spanish, Soy, S-O-E. But you have to know that that means Sawyer. So it's very, very confusing. And you have to basically deal with phonetic spelling, like how is this name spelled in a given language? There are names that you would think wouldn't give anyone any trouble that are really common, like Garcia, Garcia. And if you go and you try to use the 1850 US federal census for Texas, you'll find the names literally spelled Garsea, Garcia. And so it's difficult. I've had to help people before by literally getting the census and going line by line through it to find their ancestor who we knew lived on a particular street. And the only way we could find him was knowing that particular street. And so that's why I urge people to try to use property records if they can find them. Because
Okay,
if
Dave,
you're
Dave, I don't mean to interrupt, but
Yep.
we've only got about maybe less than 12 minutes left before class ends. And there's a couple things I did want to bring up.
Sure.
Connie, are you still in line? Let me see here. Is your name still here? Let's see here. Connie, is your name still there? Let's see. I'm going through the list of names.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, she must have logged off. She had
Maybe-
a picture of her grandfather with Pancho Villa, and she was going to try to get help from you on that. But I
Okay,
guess she's
sounds
logged
good.
off.
Well, certainly South Texas is Villista country, and there were a lot of revolutionary factions in the Mexican Revolution who had operatives here in town. Porfirio Diaz, the dictator who was overthrown by the Mexican Revolution, hired the same detective agencies that were used to break unions in this country. So like the Pinkertons and the Baldwin Felts and all of those characters were hired by Diaz to keep tabs on dissidents here. Carranza lived in San Antonio for a time. Francisco Madero lived here for a time. And so there was a lot of cloak and dagger Texas Revolution things going on. And there's a lot of research to be done in that area. Perhaps you might send me the chat questions and I could go through them when work resumes on Monday, and I could try to answer some of them for people. I apologize for being so long-winded and not allowing you people more opportunity to answer questions.
Oh, no, it
I
was
would encourage
fascinating. But there's one thing I wanted you to cover, if you can just spare just
Yeah.
a few more moments. You told me that the most interesting story about how you work with preservation of African-American cemeteries. Can you kind of
Yes.
touch on that?
Well, sure. We had a researcher that had found a vacant lot that was heavily overgrown, that was surrounded by suburban tract housing, and it kind of disturbed him. And he had heard local rumors and lore and received wisdom that it may have been a cemetery or a burial ground. And so through assisting that researcher, we did discover that it was an African-American family cemetery, that the woman who got the deed for it was the daughter of a man who had been born into slavery. She was born in 1881 and she died in 1982, aged 101 years. And people had simply assumed that all of the land that she had formerly owned had been sold to the developers who built the suburban tract housing in the late 70s and the early 1980s. And it turns out that they had in fact cleared all of the land and had begun building. And then they had belatedly discovered that they had cleared a cemetery of all of its headstones. And so they stopped work on the cemetery portion, but built the houses on literally every single side of this vacant lot, which was really a cemetery. And I don't want to get into it, but there are very particular Texas laws about cemeteries and about the treatment of human remains. And that's all going to be brought to bear on this place. But before too long, we managed to get enough interest that some African-American historians and local community members went and re-cleared the cemetery and removed the brush, and are now in the process of preserving the place. And we're attempting to identify specific burials and who may have been buried there. But yeah, There's a lot of cemeteries, and a lot of cemeteries are threatened by development. I guess you guys, for those of you on the West Coast and out in the Western states, Phoenix, I think, is the largest state capital in the United States. And it turns out that maybe Philadelphia is one of the larger state capitals, but the number 2 is Austin here in Texas. And Austin, Texas is growing by leaps and bounds. And there are a lot of cemeteries that are threatened in Travis County, Texas. And San Antonio is growing by leaps and bounds. Excuse my fib earlier, the 16th largest county in the United States, not the 13th as I claimed mistakenly. But there's so much development and so much population growth that a lot of local cemeteries are threatened. And so we're doing what we can to try to identify those places and create maps, if you will, of all of the different cemeteries.
Dave, can you kind of share with my class, because I think especially for African-American ancestry, obviously there's so many challenges,
Sure.
now to hear this other challenge about, cemeteries being, destroyed or relocated and built over. What sources are you going to use to identify the remains in that cemetery?
Right. Well, we're going to use Texas state death records. Unfortunately, Texas did not have a state level requirement to have certifications of birth and certifications of death until 1903. Fortunately, San Antonio kept records because it was a large community and a large city from the 1870s until the 1920s. So the city of San Antonio has death records, which we can use. And then we've gone through the census records, and going through the census records, we've identified 101 African-American families that lived in this part of northeastern Bexar County, in a part that no longer exists, but used to be called Wetmore. And they lived cheek and jowl with Texans who were of salient German ancestry. And they lived cheek and jowl with Texans of salient Mexican or Tejano ancestry. And the census enumerators were often German. So every single German name is spelled punctiliously correctly. And African-American names are spelled really badly because they're just writing what they think they're hearing. But we did identify 101 families, and it seems like rather a lot. And so in communication with other researchers, we're pretty sure that Wetmore was actually a post-Civil War freedom colony or independent African-American community, where after the Civil War, freed people would frequently go to places just outside the city limits, and they would squat or they would obtain preemption rights on a piece of land with the intention of expanding their holdings. In many cases, some of these people began to register cattle brands. And in some cases, they began to form communities throughout Texas. There is a GIS mapping project where historians of African-American history in Texas have tried to identify some of these communities or freedom colonies, if you prefer. And they've done a really, really good job, but Bexar County doesn't appear on their list. And so researchers here locally are pretty sure that there are at least between 7 and 9 African-American communities that started here at the end of the American Civil War. And so we're going to try to get those on the map, so to speak. And of course, we have to try to identify the burial grounds of where those people buried their ancestors. One was identified in Elmendorf, which is a community in rural Bexar County. The African-American portion of the cemetery, the cemetery had been developed over. We found a really terrible case where a developer at some point in the 20th century had illegally removed human remains from an African-American cemetery and had dumped them in a historically Black cemetery because Texas was a Jim Crow state, and so there was segregation even in burial grounds. And so archaeological volunteers went out to that area that was developed, and they managed to find small human bones like finger bones and things like that. And they found coffin fittings, which could be identified as being 19th century coffin fittings. And then a cache of the headstones was actually found in one of the African-American cemeteries. And they know now that those headstones came from a particular cemetery that had been illegally removed. There are also cases in Bexar County where a cemetery was legally removed and the remains were transferred to another cemetery. So that was a big hullabaloo here because historically, in the history of the Catholic Church, the church considered that a body had returned to the dust from whence it had sprang after 7 years in the ground. And so a lot of the earliest burial records in Bexar County, they would basically bury people again and again and again in the same place, in the same cemetery. And back then, they didn't think they were doing anything wrong because it was still hallowed ground and people were still laid to rest. And basically the older burials had to make room for the newer burials, right? In the same way that the dead make room for the living and the recently born, right? That was their concept. And so when the Catholic cemetery at the Campo Santo was removed and the remains were transferred to San Fernando #1 in San Antonio, it turns out that they only removed the most recent burials and that all of the older burials were basically left in situ at the Campo Santo. So when the Santa Rosa Hospital wanted to build a prayer and meditation garden, as soon as they broke ground, they began to find human remains and they called in the archaeologists. And the archaeologists shortly discovered what I told you, that basically a lot of human remains remained there and were never transferred to San Fernando because the canon law and the church regulations were simply different back then. As far as African-American ancestry in Texas goes, it can be rough. East Texas was definitely a slave society. It was very much a southern state. There are Black Belt counties where a majority of the people who resided there were African-American. Once you leave the drawl part of Texas or East Texas, you get into the twang part of Texas. The twang part of Texas is often less saliently African-American, but we do have a lot of Black cowboys and a lot of Black farmers that settled. You may be familiar with the Exoduster movement, where lots of African Americans attempted to leave the South and leave sharecropping and tenant farming arrangements and go somewhere else. And that had an enormous impact on Texas. Texas was always the leading cotton producing state throughout the 19th into the 20th century. And after the Civil War, cotton relied on poverty instead of slavery. And so they didn't care who picked the cotton, and so you have white tenant farmers and white sharecroppers. You have Mexican field workers and Mexican families involved in the work. And you have African-American sharecroppers and tenant farmers doing the work. And so in cotton communities or parts of Texas where cotton is a big deal, you might find that you have genealogical roots in some of those places that go back to cotton. But in the case of East Texas, if you have African-American ancestors, they almost invariably had a slave experience, and tracing slave records is enormously difficult. We just assisted this man I mentioned earlier, African-American from Oklahoma, and he has Mexican roots, which we could trace. He has African-American roots we cannot trace because a group of descendants have gotten together and pooled their resources and they discovered that a slaveholder in Rusk County, Texas, had a son who was siring children by the female slaves owned by his father. And using DNA and DNA testing, they have actually created a little network showing that a particular slaveholder sired children from a group of women. All I could do for this man was put him in contact with those descendants who are tracing their ancestry using DNA, and show him the white slaveholding family in Rusk County, Texas on the US federal censuses, and then show him that same family on the slave schedules of the same censuses to show all of the African-American slaves that he owned. By that time in the 1860s and the 1850s, there are no longer African-born slaves for the most part. The vast majority of them are African-Americans born in the United States who are descended from people who underwent the rigors of the Middle Passage and were transported to the slave economy in the United States. And through the 19th century, from the early republic in the teens through the 1820s into the 1830s and the settlement of Texas and the 1840s, we are discussing a massive sustained reallocation of slave labor from the Old South to the New South, areas like the Mississippi Delta, Louisiana, Mississippi, Western Alabama, and certainly Eastern Texas. And so in those cases, you're going to encounter a brick wall where your ancestor simply did not have a surname at all. In fact, on the census slave schedules, they weren't even given a name. They're simply a number, a gender, an age range, and that's it, and who their owner was. There's a lot of work going on with African-American family history and family heritage. There was an eminent scholar, I think she's still alive. If so, she must be older than the hills. Her name was Gwendolyn Midlow Hall. She did a really amazing project on slaves in Louisiana. She was able to identify a lot of slaves that were brought during the transatlantic slave trade by the French and later the Spanish to Louisiana, were Bambara in their ethnicity from sub-Saharan Africa. And she has started a database on surnames, African-American surnames in Louisiana. I think other people are hard at work on similar research in other areas. The Chesapeake and Virginia was inundated by slaves that were mainly brought from the catchment areas off the Bight of Benin. So we're talking Igbo people related to the people in Eastern Nigeria. And large numbers of people were brought in the 1700s, specifically to tobacco plantations in the Chesapeake. A lot of work has been done on rice in the South Carolina Low Country. They literally were taking slaves from catchment areas in Africa where they cultivated rice because they wanted the rice skill, the farming skill of those particular slaves. In the case of Brazil, there was a gold rush in Minas Gerais in the 1700s. And because of those gold strikes, they wanted a lot of quote unquote Mina slaves from what is now Ghana, because they already had familiarity with gold work and with mining gold. And so those slaves were in high demand. So basically we're at a point where because of technology, we're linking up DNA results, which are getting year by year ever more sophisticated. And we have surname projects where people are trying to identify the surnames of African Americans. We have local African American historical groups and family history groups that are proliferating and are doing a lot of research and a lot of work. And we've got things like the Slave Trade Database Project that a multinational group of scholars working over the course of 2 decades attempted to digitize every single known slave voyage from Africa to the New World. And if you go to their database, it'll simply blow your mind. I mean, you can literally go to a map and click on a slave ship, and it will identify who the owners of the slave ship were, how it was flagged, who the owner of the slave ship was, and any other pertinent details. And so basically the actual voyages are being mapped now. And so our family history, I would say, our neurosis of a sort of wanting to know more about genealogy and family history and where we come from and who our ancestors were and what their lives may have been like, is now linking up with this explosion in the use of computer technology and the ability to network and link up with people, and a lot of really heavy duty historical research. And so, you know, basically expect wonders as we grow older and as we age, and as some of the people we're bequeathing our family history to come of age, and they finally get the light coming on, or they finally get the family history bug, they'll be able to make extraordinary discoveries.
And what a great way to end today's session. I like that. It just kind of sums it all up, why we're doing it, and you know, what everyone is doing to help each other do it. So with that, Dave, I'm going to say thank you, because we're kind of past our class time.